The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Right now, as of May 2026, fewer than 150 vessels are transiting the waterway each month, down from 3,000 before February 28th. That single number explains everything. The world's most important 21-mile channel, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean, carries roughly 20% of all global petroleum and 20% of all liquefied natural gas. On March 4, 2026, Iran shut it. Brent crude, which had been trading below $70 a barrel in late February, surged past $120 within 2 weeks. The International Energy Agency, an organization not given to dramatic language, called it the greatest global energy security challenge in the history of oil markets. That was not hyperbole. That was a measurement. The official narrative is straightforward. The United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, targeting Iranian military sites and nuclear infrastructure. Iran retaliated. A war broke out. But the war on the surface, the airstrikes, the missiles, the assassinations, is not the war that will reshape the next decade. The war underneath it, the one being fought in futures markets and pipeline contracts and currency settlement systems, is far larger, far quieter, and its winners are not the ones standing at the podium in Washington. Who is actually winning this war? And why does the answer have almost nothing to do with who fired first? To understand why February 28, 2026 happened, you have to go back not to any single provocation, but to a 40-year architecture of economic control that was already crumbling before the first bomb fell. Iran sits on the world's second-largest natural gas reserves and the fourth-largest proven oil reserves, roughly 209 billion barrels of crude. For most of the past 4 decades, that wealth has been locked behind a wall of Western sanctions, largely preventing Tehran from converting its geology into geopolitical leverage. The sanctions were first imposed in November 1979 after Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. They never fully lifted, they accumulated, they compounded, and by 2025, they had become the defining feature of Iran's economic reality, a country sitting on a fortune it could only partially spend. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, briefly changed that calculus. Iran agreed to cap uranium enrichment and submit to the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, inspections in exchange for sanctions relief. Iran complied. The deal held until 2018, when the first Trump administration withdrew unilaterally and reimposed maximum pressure. The trial collapsed. Oil exports fell from 2.5 million barrels per day to a sanctioned floor. Iran's economy shrank, food prices rose, and the Iranian population, who had voted for the deal and briefly tasted its dividends, watched them evaporate without a single Iranian provocation triggering the reversal. That decision cost the United States something it has not yet fully priced. It told every country watching that an American signature on a diplomatic agreement is conditional, renewable, or revocable based on the domestic politics of a future administration. By 2025, nearly all Iranian oil exports, averaging 1.38 million barrels per day, flowed exclusively to China, generating roughly $60 billion annually, according to commodity intelligence firm Kepler. China's small, semi-independent refineries, known as teapots, processed the barrels Washington insisted did not exist. The sanctions were not stopping Iran's oil revenue. They were redirecting it away from Western-aligned markets and straight into Beijing's energy supply chain. In September 2025, Britain, France, and Germany triggered the JCPOA's snapback mechanism, reimposing every pre-2015 United Nations sanction. Iran officially terminated the agreement on October 18, 2025. Negotiations between Washington and Tehran collapsed completely after the June 2025 Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. By January 2026, mass protests had broken out across Iran following a sharp rial depreciation, met with what international human rights monitors documented as a massacre. Security forces killing thousands of civilians. The regime was cornered, domestically collapsing, internationally isolated. and sitting on a choke point that carried 20% of the world's oil through 21 miles of water. The question was never whether Iran would use that leverage. The question was what would force the moment, and whether the United States had correctly calculated the cost of finding out. At 20:38 UTC on February 27, 2026, President Donald Trump gave the order. 6 hours later, the opening salvo began. At 06:35 UTC on February 28, the United States Central Command, CENTCOM, announced that it and partner forces had begun airstrikes against Iran. U.S. warships launched Tomahawk cruise missiles. The Army deployed high-mobility artillery rocket system, HIMARS launchers, and B-2 stealth bombers struck fortified ballistic missile facilities buried deep inside Iranian soil. Months of joint U.S. and Israeli strategic deception of satellite imagery had preceded the strike. Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, commanders drove their official cars home from headquarters the night before, then returned on foot, so surveillance would show no unusual activity at the base. The surprise was total. In the first 12 hours, U.S. and Israeli forces launched nearly 900 strikes targeting Iranian missiles, air defenses, military infrastructure, and leadership. 3 gatherings of senior Iranian officials were hit within 30 seconds of each other. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was assassinated in an Israeli air attack. Iranian state media confirmed his death on March 1st. The Islamic Republic, a system built around the theological authority of a single supreme leader for 46 years, had its apex removed in the opening minutes of the war. Iran's response was immediate and vast. Under Operation True Promise d'Effort, Iran retaliated within hours, expanding the war's geographic footprint to 7 countries within 48 hours: Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iraq. The pre-war Iranian ballistic missile arsenal stood at approximately 2,500 according to Israeli intelligence estimates. By April 4th, the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, and the American Enterprise Institute's Critical Threats Project had documented 95 Iranian strike waves. U.S. intelligence had undercounted Iran's missiles by more than 1,000. That single miscalculation shaped everything that followed. The economic war ignited on March 4th. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, using a combination of warnings, mine-laying, ship seizures, and Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, Navy swarm boat activity. The choke point that energy analysts had spent decades calling a theoretical risk had become a physical reality. Shipments through the strait collapsed from more than 20 million barrels per day in February to approximately 3.8 million barrels per day by early April, an 81% reduction. Iraq and Kuwait began curtailing oil production within days. Storage facilities filled, wells were shut in. The collective oil production of Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates dropped by a reported 6.7 million barrels per day by March 10th, and by at least 10 million barrels per day by March 12th. Then came the escalation that shattered every remaining red line. On March 18th, Israel struck the South Pars natural gas field, the world's largest, in Asaluya, Iran, with U.S. coordination and approval. South Pars is not simply an Iranian energy asset. It produces 730 million cubic meters of gas per day, supplying 70% of Iran's domestic gas consumption, feeding power plants, heating systems, and the petrochemical complexes that sustain what remains of Iran's sanctioned economy. The same geological reservoir extends into Qatari waters, where it is known as the North Field, and underpins Qatar Energy's liquefied natural gas, LNG export industry, roughly 1/5 of global supply. Israel had not merely hit an enemy, it had struck infrastructure shared with an ally. Within hours, Iran retaliated against Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city. Qatar Energy confirmed a 17% reduction in processing capacity, with repair timelines estimated at 3 to 5 years and projected revenue losses of $20 billion. Oil prices, already elevated, briefly topped $119 a barrel following the South Pars strike. Trump threatened to massively blow up the gas field if Iran continued its attacks on Qatari infrastructure, while simultaneously claiming the U.S. had known nothing about Israel's strike. 2 senior Israeli officials confirmed to CNN and Axios the attack was coordinated with and approved by the White House. The gap between the public statement and the verified record was, by that point, a defining feature of how this war was being narrated in Washington. The 2-month U.S.-Israel air campaign cost approximately $25 billion. The first 100 hours alone cost $3.7 billion according to analysis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. It destroyed roughly 1/3 of Iran's air defense systems, damaged all 3 main nuclear enrichment sites at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan, and sank 9 Iranian warships on day 1 alone. But Iran's underground missile city network, a web of tunnels and transporter erector launchers that could emerge, fire from pre-surveyed positions, and return underground, meant no air campaign could disarm Iran's retaliatory capability. CENTCOM reported destroying 66% of Iran's missile and drone production sites. Iran kept firing anyway. The military campaign achieved tactical damage. What it could not achieve was control of 21 miles of water, and the 120 per barrel question that water had become. The military history that unlocks this conflict is not from the Middle East. It is from 1973, the Arab oil embargo that followed the Yom Kippur War. In October of that year, Arab members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, cut off oil exports to the United States and its allies in retaliation for American support of Israel. The oil price quadrupled in 3 months. A global recession followed. American motorists queued at petrol stations for hours. The U.S. economy contracted. What emerged from that crisis was not just a recovery, it was the architecture of the modern global financial order. In 1974, the Nixon administration struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. Riyadh would price its oil exclusively in U.S. dollars and recycle the surplus revenues back into U.S. Treasury bonds. In exchange, Washington would guarantee Saudi security. That agreement became the Petrodollar system, the invisible engine that has kept dollar dominance intact for 52 years. Every country on Earth that needed oil had to hold dollars to buy it. That artificial demand for the greenback underwrote half a century of American financial power. Today, Iran holds the key to that lock, and it has just turned it. The silent beneficiary of this war is not the United States. It is not Israel. It is not even Iran, whose economy is in structural collapse, whose food prices have risen 105%, whose supreme leader was assassinated in the opening minutes of the conflict. The silent beneficiary, operating with disciplined patience in near-total public silence, is Russia. In January 2026, Russia's fiscal revenues had fallen 11.6% year-on-year. The Kremlin was reportedly preparing 10% cuts to all non-security spending. The G7 oil price cap on Russian crude had been lowered to $46 a barrel. Western secondary sanctions were tightening, and Russia's shadow fleet tankers were being systematically interdicted. Vladimir Putin's war machine was running on fumes. Then, on February 28th, Operation Epic Fury began. Within days, Brent crude surged from below $70 to above $120. According to the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, a Helsinki-based think tank, Russia's average daily export earnings reached an estimated $388 million per day within 24 days of the conflict's start, 20% above its daily average in February. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated Russia could earn between $45 billion and $151 billion in additional budget revenues across 2026, depending on the conflict's duration. The Kremlin, staring at fiscal collapse in January, was handed an energy windfall by a U.S. decision made in Washington without any apparent calculation of Moscow's position on the balance sheet. That is not the full picture. The U.S. Treasury, attempting to stabilize global oil markets, granted India a temporary emergency waiver on March 6, 2026, authorizing the purchase of stranded Russian oil cargoes. It then relaxed secondary sanctions on Russian crude, described as a narrow market stabilization measure. The practical consequence, confirmed by multiple reporting outlets, was that Moscow used the resulting revenue infusion to provide Iran with satellite targeting data on American troops, ships, and aircraft. The first major relaxation of sanctions on Russia since 2014, granted in the middle of a war the US was fighting, directly financed the intelligence support that was being used to kill Americans. That is not a theoretical risk. That is the documented sequence of events. The unnamed risk that the current coverage is systematically failing to price is not military. It is monetary. On March 14, 2026, a senior Iranian official told CNN that Tehran was considering allowing oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. On one condition: payment must be made in Chinese yuan, not US dollars. Deutsche Bank's foreign exchange managing director Malika Sakhdeva published a client note on March 24th warning that the conflict could be remembered as a key catalyst for the erosion of petrodollar dominance and the beginnings of what she called the Petroyuan. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has already fallen from 71% in 1999 to approximately 57% today, its lowest since the International Monetary Fund (IMF) began tracking the data in 1995. China stockpiled Iranian crude throughout the sanctions era, buying 90% of Iran's exports, paying in yuan, and building a parallel energy settlement system that does not require the dollar at all. Iran's strait closure has now turned that payment architecture into a live instrument of geopolitical leverage. The petrodollar system is not collapsing this week, but the 1973 parallel holds one more lesson the current moment has not yet absorbed. The Arab oil embargo did not last forever. What it produced was permanent. The architecture built in its aftermath, the security for oil dollars deal, the recycling of Gulf surpluses into US treasuries, the dollar's status as the only currency in which a barrel of crude could be purchased, reshaped the global financial order for half a century. The question this war is forcing, and that no one in Washington appears to be asking at the policy level, is what architecture gets built when this one ends?